Hey everybody, this is the fourth here, and in this video, I wanted to introduce you to another technique regarding panning and the stereo image. And this technique is recreating a live performance. So this technique has limited relevance in electronic music production, but it can be helpful to utilize it when you are able to. So the idea here is to pan your sounds in such a way that their positions in the stereo field relate to where they would be on stage, or how they would be laid out wherever you happen to be listening to them. So a great example of this is if you were to make an orchestral piece. If you were to use a certain orchestral VST plugin, it might already have the panning set up for you. But if you were to do it using independent instrument recordings or multi-samples or synthesized instruments, then you would have to figure out the panning on your own. And you might be a little bit lost at how you should pan different things in an orchestra. And one option that you do have that is a really great option in my opinion is to look up certain seating arrangements for an orchestra, and then use the one that will work best with your track to produce the best mix. So I've loaded up an image I found online, and this is just the instruments of the orchestra. So, if you looked at this and you had all of your different orchestral sounds, you could pan them according to this. You could pan your harps to the left, your first violins to the left, you could have your cellos to the right, and then you could have your flutes kind of a little bit to the left, and your English horns a little bit to the right, and your trumpets all a little bit more to the left, with your tuba to the right and your trombones a little bit more right than the trumpets, but not quite as right as the tuba. And you could just use this as a guideline to position the panning of each instrument that you have in your track. And there are plenty of different times that you might use this idea. If you were kind of mixing a rock performance and they had a certain layout on stage, you might kind of pan your different sounds based on that layout. Or if you had like a lead singer who was center stage, and then you had a backup vocalist who was to the right, and then you had a choir to the left, you might keep your lead vocalist centered and pan the backup vocalist to the right with the choir to the left. And so I just think this is a really good idea to use whenever you're kind of using real instrument sounds in your tracks. And you have the option to pan it based on how it might be if you were listening to it live. And doing this can help you, get your stereo width because you are panning these different sounds in different ways. And it can help the sound a lot more natural because you are kind of recreating how it would be if it were played in real life in front of you. And it can also just help you decide better how to pan different sounds because you have this kind of guideline to use. So I'm going to look at a quick example here, and this example is a drum kit. And so here is my drum loop that I have made with this drum kit. And you can hear right now everything is panned to the center, but I want to increase the stereo width and, just help widen up this drum beat a little bit. And to do that, I'm going to be using this little drum layout as a guide. And so from the looks of this image, this is based on the audience perspective. So if you wanted to do it from the drummer's perspective, you would be panning things opposite of how you see them here. But since I'm making a song for people who are going to listen to it, I think the perspective of the listener is a good idea. So I'm basically just going to pan my sounds based on how they're laid out here. And, you don't have to follow it perfectly. You could definitely pan certain things differently if you think it would sound better. So, I might even do that in this. And I think I will to give you guys an idea of how you could do that. So, the first thing is the kick drum is going to stay nice and centered. And then the next sound I have here is the closed hi-hat and the open hi-hat, which are both going to be just this hi-hat cymbal, which is panned pretty far to the right. So I'm going to pan that to the right by maybe 85%. And I'm going to do that both for the closed hat and the open hat, because in real life they are the same instrument. And then this sound here is also an open hat, so I'm going to paste that value here again as well. So now all the hi-hats are panned to the right. And then next up I have a crash cymbal. So if I look over here, the crash cymbal is also to the right, but it's not quite as far as the hi-hat. So I'm going to pan that maybe 75% to the right. And after the crash, I have a ride cymbal sound. And you can see on the image, the ride cymbal is opposite the crash cymbal. It's to the left. And I'm going to actually pan it a little bit further left than the crash cymbal because, there's nothing to match the hi-hats. And in this track, the crash only plays once, where the ride cymbal is just kind of, it hits every beat. So I'm going to pan it to the left the same amount that the hi-hats are panned right, just to help balance out the mix some. But if you wanted to, you could keep it the same as the crash cymbal, or you could pan the ride and the crash both hard left and right respectively. It's really up to you what you do specifically. It's just nice to use this as a little bit of a guide. So after the ride, I have my snare. And if I really wanted to match this drum layout, I could pan it just slightly to the right, because you can see it is panned just slightly to the right. But I don't really want to copy it exactly. I want this snare to be panned dead center with the kick. So that's how I'm going to do it. But if you wanted to, you could pan it a little bit. There wouldn't be anything wrong, depending on the style of music that you were making. In dubstep, it wouldn't really be appropriate. But if you're trying to do some kind of, rock setup or acoustic or something, it might be a lot more appropriate. And then finally, I have my tom sounds. So I have a high tom, a mid tom, and then a low tom or a floor tom. And you can see here it has a high tom on the right, the middle tom on the left, and the floor tom further to the left. So I could do this based on that and pan the high tom slightly to the right, the middle tom slightly to the left, and the floor tom further to the left. But for the sake of balance and adding a little bit more excitement to the mix, I'm going to pan the toms not based on the overall drum kit, but based in relation to each other. And I'm going to pan them a little bit further. So if we are panning these relatively, you'll see that the middle tom is in the center, the high tom is to the right, and the floor tom is to the left. And so that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep the middle tom in the center, and I'm going to pan the high tom not too far, maybe 60%. And then I will pan the floor tom 60% to the left. So, if you wanted to, you could follow the image more closely, or you could just kind of use it as a guide and get a little bit creative like I have in this example. And this is what my drum beat sounds like now. And I think that sounds pretty good. It widens up the stereo image a lot. And so I could put, a synthesizer or a big bass line or whatever right in the middle there and have it be pretty open. And like I said, you can go and make any changes you want to afterwards. If I don't quite like that crash being panned as hard, I could, bring it down and maybe only pan it 15% right to see how that sounds. And, just do whatever. It's just nice to use a real performance or a real instrument setup as a little bit of a guide if you're not quite sure what to do with panning, or if you just want to create something that sounds, a little bit more real to life or anything like that. And this kind of thing that I've done with the drums in this video is something I used to do a lot when I was making hip-hop tracks, and I don't do it as often anymore because I don't tend to have drum sounds that are based on a real drum kit as much. And I still pan things in different ways, but I don't really use a real drum kit setup as a guide or anything. But it can be a nice thing to do.